An untamed heart. In the Highlands, only love can tame a free soul. Anya, Lysander. Epigraph. In the Highlands, love is the fiercest battle. The wild lands keep their secrets and their untamed hearts. Summary. In the 15th century, in the untamed Scottish Highlands, the fate of a warrior collides with that of a woman who will challenge his will. Eoghan MacKerran is a man of honor, a warrior fiercely loyal to his clan, yet a rebel at heart. When his brother and clan leader Cian orders him to marry Princess Ailis to seal an alliance with the crown, Eoghan resists. He wants no part in a loveless marriage, nor in bowing to the will of the court. But the safety of his people hangs by a thread, and soon he is forced to travel to Edinburgh to accept a fate he did not choose. One night, however, by a hidden lake deep within the MacDara clan's forest, Eoghan discovers a wounded woman. Brighde, wild and elusive as the wind, is no courtly princess, but in her eyes burns the fire of someone who fears nothing, not even him. In a single moment his world is turned upside down. Torn between duty and desire, between loyalty to his clan and the passion stirred by this woman of untamed spirit, Eoghan must make the hardest choice of his life. Will he follow the path laid out for him, or defy fate in the name of love? Prologue. In the year of our Lord 1442, Scotland, lands of Dunlac. The lands of the Highlands were forged in blood and honor, in a fragile balance between loyalty and rebellion. For centuries the clans had fought against the rule of kings, defending their independence with steel and unbreakable oaths. Yet in that turbulent 15th century, politics and war wove themselves into the fate of individuals, turning men's hearts into pawns in a greater game. Eoghan MacKerran, second son of the clan, had always carried the fierceness of his ancestors in his very skin. He knew no loyalty greater than that owed to his family, no duty beyond protecting his people. But now his brother and chieftain Cian demanded a sacrifice that filled him with rage: to wed Princess Ailis, daughter of King Alistair III, to seal an alliance with the crown. Eoghan rejected the idea, with the vehemence of a warrior who had never once considered bending to a foreign sovereign. Had the MacKerrans not fought for generations to preserve their freedom? Was he not, like all his kin, a man of the Highlands, raised to answer only to his own blood? Marrying a princess, a woman of the court, felt like a betrayal of his very essence. He wanted no cold union woven of strategy and false vows. But Cian's voice rang with the weight of a leader who knew too well the dangers looming over their people. The MacKerrans had survived wars and broken alliances, enemies who longed for their ruin, and it was the king's intervention that had kept them safe until now. The safety of the clan depended on this marriage. It was not a request, it was a command. Eoghan, caught between loyalty and unrest, mounted his horse and rode aimlessly, searching the vastness of his land for an answer that would not come. The northern winds lashed his face, the cold seeped into his skin, but not even the fury of nature could calm the storm within. It was then that fate led him to the lands of Clan MacDara. There, by a lake hidden among the trees, he sought a moment of respite, unaware that someone else was approaching at that very moment. A young woman with an untamed spirit, a daughter of the Highlands like himself. Their meeting would be a clash of wills, a challenge to what was expected. And though he did not yet know it, that day would change the course of his life forever. Chapter 1. Honor is a shield that only a brave man knows how to bear. Brighde MacDara brought her mare to a sudden halt, her breath ragged, keeping pace with the pounding of her heart. She looked around, trying to get her bearings, but the landscape looked strangely uniform. She was lost. She had ridden aimlessly, letting her fury lead the way. The news of her imminent transfer to the court had filled her with indignation, and her immediate impulse had been to get away from it all, to seek refuge in the vast open fields where only the wind could hear her protests. She drew in a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She couldn't deny the position her family was in. The king had chosen her name from among many young women of the Highland clans to serve Princess Ailis, and her father had no power to refuse.
But that didn't mean she would accept it without a fight.
Resigned, she turned her mare's reins and followed a barely visible path through the trees. Sooner or later, she'd find someone who could show her the way back.
The sound of running water made her stop.
Through the trees, a lake stretched out with the stillness of a mirror. Its surface reflected the sky, bathed in golden tones by the fading light of the afternoon. She approached cautiously, feeling an odd sense of comfort in the peaceful scene.
That was when she saw him.
A man was rising from the water, his strong arms brushing away the droplets that slid down his bronze skin. His dark hair clung messily to his face, and the power in his stance spoke of years of training and battle. Brighde barely had time to process the scene before a jolt of shock surged through her.
A cry escaped her lips as she realized what she was seeing.
Startled by the sudden sound, her mare reared. Brighde tried to hold on, but the surprise caught her off guard. She lost her balance and fell hard to the ground. The impact was swift and brutal, her head struck the earth and the world went black. Eoghan MacKerran, until then unaware of her presence, spun around at the sound of the cry. His blue eyes, trained to catch danger in the chaos of battle, immediately locked onto the motionless figure on the grass. He cursed under his breath, and without hesitation leapt from the water, forgetting his nakedness entirely. He quickly pulled on his tunic, the damp fabric clinging to his wet skin as he knelt beside the young woman. Her face was serene, though a fine layer of dust darkened her cheeks. Eoghan gently touched her forehead, searching for signs of consciousness.
"Foolish woman," he muttered. "What were you doing riding alone so far from home?"
When no answer came, he slid an arm beneath her shoulders and lifted her with ease. Her skin was warm, and her steady breathing told him there was no immediate danger. Still, he couldn't leave her there.
Chapter 2.
When the woman fell to the ground and the horse bolted in panic, Eoghan barely had time to react. He dropped to his knees beside her and, with hands both steady and gentle, lifted her head. Relief flooded him as he saw her chest rise and fall in a slow, even rhythm. She was still breathing. He brushed a few strands of her reddish hair aside, feeling the softness between his fingers. Her skin was pale and delicate, her lips full and slightly parted, moist as if waiting to be kissed.
He shook his head in frustration. This was no time for such thoughts.
He patted her cheeks lightly.
"My lady, wake up," he whispered, his voice softer than he'd expected.
No response. The blow to her head didn't seem serious at first glance, but he had seen soldiers fall with no visible wound and never wake again. He couldn't risk leaving her alone. Without another thought, he lifted her into his arms, her light weight and the warmth of her body pressing against him. His horse waited patiently beneath the shade of a tree, and with careful effort, he placed her in the saddle before mounting behind her. His hands instinctively settled on her thighs to keep her steady. As they rode at a gentle pace, his mind wandered. She had to be around 20, maybe a little younger, but certainly older than 15. A woman, not a child. Her bearing was refined, her clothes simple but well made, and the fine horse she had been riding made it clear she wasn't a commoner. Who was she? Where had she come from?
What was she doing alone in these lands? He sighed.
His body still bore the weariness of war, and the suppressed desire that haunted him only added weight to his conscience. He hadn't touched a woman in weeks, and the nearness of this sleeping girl against him stirred feelings he preferred not to examine. He couldn't deny his attraction, but he would never take advantage of her vulnerability. The forest stretched out around them in deceptive calm. He had to find shelter before nightfall. Relief washed over him as he spotted a cabin half hidden among the trees.
It didn't look inhabited.
He tied the horse to a trunk and approached cautiously. The door creaked open, revealing a simple, neglected interior. A table with a few chairs, a cold fireplace, and a straw mattress he hoped wasn't full of vermin.
It would do for the night.
He returned for the young woman and carried her inside, laying her gently on the makeshift bed. A faint moan escaped her lips, a sign she would wake soon. He covered her with his plaid, making sure she was warm and comfortable before stepping back. He watched her face, her steady breathing, the way her hair spread across the mattress like a golden halo. He lit a fire and barred the door. His sword lay beside him, ready for anything. Sitting on the floor, he leaned back against the wall and crossed his arms over his chest. He should rest, but his eyes kept drifting to the sleeping woman.
"Wake up," he murmured without meaning to.
The night wore on, and with it, the quiet certainty that this encounter would change his fate in ways he could not yet imagine. For a moment that felt eternal, Eoghan remained motionless, caught between vision and desire. He had seen beauty before, felt attraction, but nothing compared to the way the world seemed to halt around her. It wasn't just the delicacy of her skin under the moonlight, or the softness of her tousled hair. It was her vulnerability, her fight to hold herself together even through pain. Something inside him broke and rebuilt itself all at once. It was a revelation as sudden as lightning in a storm. She wasn't just the one his clan had charged him to protect, not merely a duty he was bound to fulfill. In that moment, she was everything. When he took her in his arms, he felt more than the weight of her weakened body. He felt the weight of a destiny he hadn't foreseen but could no longer deny. It didn't matter if until now he had believed his life was already mapped out, his desires contained. In that single fleeting second, he knew nothing would ever be the same again. Desire didn't always arrive with clarity or words. Sometimes it came as a pause in the rhythm, an eclipse that blocked out what we thought we knew to reveal what we truly felt. Brighde let out a soft groan and reached for her head, feeling the sharp pain that clouded her senses. When she tried to move, a stabbing ache forced her to lie still. She pressed her lips together to stifle another sound, and took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Slowly, her mind began to piece together the scattered fragments of memory. She opened her eyes cautiously.
Her heart pounded in her chest, but not from pain alone. There was something else, a nearby presence.
A slow, steady breath.
She was not alone. She froze, holding her breath.
Fear gripped her for an instant, but reason followed quickly. If that person had meant her harm, they would have done it already. Bit by bit, she turned her head just enough to glance beside her.
Her breath caught in her throat. It was him. The man from the lake.
The one whose mere presence had made her fall from her horse, the one who had stood before her with no shame.
There was no doubt.
Now he slept beside her, his face softened by sleep, his chest rising and falling in a calm rhythm. The fire in the hearth cast gentle shadows across his skin, highlighting the strong lines of his face, the faint stubble on his cheeks, the dark hair falling over his brow. Brighde felt a shiver run down her spine.
He was a striking man, no doubt. But beyond his appearance, what surprised her most was the sense of safety that wrapped around her. She wasn't afraid.
Something deep inside told her he wouldn't harm her.
That he had taken care of her.
She drew in a long breath and with effort tried to sit up. The pain made her bite her lip, but she didn't stop. She couldn't remain there without answers.
As soon as she moved, she sensed a shift in Eoghan's breathing.
His body tensed as he stirred slightly, letting out a low, rough sigh. Then, with eyelids still heavy with sleep, he opened his eyes halfway. When he saw her awake, his gaze sharpened, first with confusion and then with a mix of relief and seriousness.
"You're finally awake," he murmured, his voice deep and thick with sleep.
Brighde swallowed hard. Her mind still drifted between sleep and wakefulness, but she had no intention of appearing weak.
"Where am I?"
Her voice came out raspier than expected, almost a whisper. Eoghan slowly pushed himself up, propping one elbow on the blanket. His eyes studied her closely before answering.
"In my cabin. I found you unconscious in the woods and brought you here."
His tone was calm, but there was something else in his eyes. Concern, perhaps.
She frowned.
A flood of questions swirled in her mind.
"How long have I been asleep?" "Since last night."
"You were weak and hurt." He glanced away briefly, as if recalling something, then looked back at her.
"What were you doing alone in the woods?"
Brighde looked away. She still felt dazed and wasn't ready to reveal too much.
"That's none of your business," she said with a hint of sharpness, though her voice lacked true bite.
Eoghan raised an eyebrow but didn't press her. He leaned back slightly, giving her space.
Are you in much pain? He asked after a pause.
Brighde hesitated.
The truth was yes, but admitting it felt like showing unnecessary weakness. I'm fine, she said firmly, though the stab of pain in her side betrayed her.
Eoghan let out a short breath, making no effort to hide his disbelief.
Of course you are. And I'm a devout monk.
He leaned forward slightly and with a patient gesture, offered her a bowl of water.
Drink. You need to regain your strength.
Brighde hesitated but thirst won over pride. She took the bowl with trembling hands and drank in slow sips, feeling the cool liquid soothe her throat. When she finished, she set the bowl aside and looked at him again. Silence settled between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Eoghan watched her closely, as if trying to read her.
At last he was the one to break the stillness. You should rest a little more, he said in a neutral tone, though there was a hint of genuine concern beneath it. You'll be stronger tomorrow to continue on your way.
Brighde felt a twist in her chest. Continue on her way. Did that mean they would soon go their separate paths?
The thought brought an odd pang of unease.
She nodded, but as she settled back down she couldn't help wondering what role Eoghan MacKerran would play in her fate. Because something inside her told her this meeting was no accident. And that man would not disappear from her life so easily.
Chapter 3. A warrior fights not only with his sword, but with his word and his loyalty.
Eoghan woke to a slight movement beside him, followed by a sigh that barely disturbed the stillness of the cabin. Without realizing how it had happened, he had ended up lying next to the stranger, his arm draped around her with unconscious possessiveness. The heat of her body, the press of her thighs against his abdomen, sparked a primal and dangerous feeling inside him. His desire surged fierce and consuming. With a conscious effort, he moved his arm away and rolled onto his back. He couldn't afford to give in to temptation. He forced his thoughts elsewhere, anywhere, to avoid being consumed by the hunger that clawed at him. He stood abruptly and after stoking the fire, stepped outside to chop wood, hoping the exertion would burn away the fever in his blood. Brighde woke soon after, momentarily disoriented. The warmth of the blanket covering her reminded her where she was, and with a soft breath of relief, she confirmed she was alone. The memory of the previous night returned all at once. The way she had slept beside that man, how her body had responded to him, made her flush with both embarrassment and indignation. She rose with purpose, wrapping herself in pride-like armor.
When she stepped to the door, she saw him.
He stood a few meters away, his back to her, torso bare and glistening with the sweat of early labor. He was chopping wood with almost hypnotic precision, each movement calculated, every swing of the axe exact. Brighde caught herself watching, eyes trailing over the muscles that flexed and released beneath sun-kissed skin. She forced herself to look away, and took a deep breath before calling out.
My lord.
Eoghan turned, a look of easy confidence on his face. He swept a hand through his damp hair, brushing it from his brow, and walked toward her with a crooked smile. My lady, he replied in that deep voice of his, the words soft like a caress. Brighde swallowed and squared her shoulders.
I'm feeling well, she said quickly, not giving him a chance to ask. Are you certain? He asked, the gentleness in his tone momentarily disarming her.
She pressed her lips together and crossed her arms.
Nothing broken, if that's what you're wondering.
Though I wouldn't have fallen from the saddle if you... Eoghan raised a brow, amusement flickering in his eyes.
If I what? He asked with mock innocence.
Brighde shot him a glare, but his relaxed stance and that teasing smile irritated her as much as it intrigued her.
If you'd been more prudent, she finished with a huff. Ah, so it's my fault, he teased, stepping a little closer.
His voice dropped to a warm whisper as he leaned in.
Or maybe you fell because you wanted me and couldn't handle it.
Brighde felt heat rush to her cheeks, but she refused to let him win. Arrogant man, that much is certain, she snapped. She moved to step away, but he was quicker, catching her wrist. The warmth of his skin against hers sent a jolt through her, and she held her breath.
"Wait," he murmured, his eyes locked on hers.
Brighde should have told him to let go, should have scolded him, but something in the way he looked at her kept her frozen in place.
"You have nothing to fear from me," he said softly.
Brighde narrowed her eyes.
"That's what you think." At last he released her slowly, as if reluctant to break the contact.
Brighde took the chance to gather herself.
"I'll escort you back," Owen said then, placing a hand over his heart and bowing his head with theatrical flair.
"Eoghan MacKerran, at your service." Brighde let out a dry laugh.
"I know exactly who you are, Eoghan MacKerran."
For the first time his expression showed surprise.
"We met at your brother's wedding," she added with a slight tilt of her head.
Owen blinked, trying to remember. Brighde relished the moment.
"Maybe you didn't look at me closely enough," she went on. "Or maybe your eyes were too busy admiring other parts of the lady's anatomy."
Against all odds he burst out laughing.
"Gods, I adore that sharp tongue of yours."
Brighde smiled, savoring her small victory even though her heart was pounding. She knew playing with a man like him was dangerous, but maybe, for the first time in her life, she felt like taking the risk.
Chapter 4.
They rode all day. Owen could feel Brighde's frailty against him as he held her securely. His mount galloped forward, slicing through the cold afternoon wind. For what felt like hours to her, she clung to the saddle with all the strength her hands could muster, but the effort was taking its toll on her body, still weakened from the fall. Her breathing grew erratic, her arms trembled, and her endurance waned with every jolt of the horse. Sensing her fatigue, Owen gently pulled the reins and slowed the horse to a walk.
"Thank you, I couldn't go on." "My fall, no doubt," she murmured in a faint voice. "No doubt," he echoed softly, removing the arm that had been holding her.
Brighde felt an unexpected sense of emptiness, as though the warmth that had enveloped her vanished with that simple gesture.
"Have you ever been to court, my lord?" she asked, searching for a conversation that might distract her from the exhaustion.
Owen turned his face slightly, puzzled by the question.
"Yes, why?" "I'm to become one of Princess Ailis's ladies-in-waiting. That's why we're passing through my uncle's estate."
"Do you know her?" She immediately sensed the tension that overtook him. His muscles stiffened, his posture grew rigid.
"Only in passing," he replied curtly. "Did she seem kind to you?" "Of course." "Was that all?"
Brighde turned slightly in the saddle, trying to read his expression.
There was something off in his demeanor, a distance that hadn't been there before.
"Could you tell me more, if you've already met her?"
"Is that so difficult?" she pressed, trying to make sense of his silence. "I'll let you form your own opinion of her, my lady. I wouldn't want to influence you."
Brighde frowned. Sometimes that man could be infuriating.
"You won't influence me, Owen. I'm asking as a favor."
The warrior sighed deeply, as if the struggle wasn't in the conversation but within himself.
"Then I do have one piece of advice for you, Brighde. Refuse."
She blinked, confused.
"Excuse me." "I can't," she sighed, unsettled by his reaction. "At court I'll surely find a good match."
Owen let out a bitter laugh. "Good matches are made in the Highlands."
"There's no need to go to court for that."
Brighde felt a jolt of confusion. Why did he seem so upset? His mood shifted like mountain winds.
"Absolutely," she snapped, crossing her arms. "But since no suitor here seems suitable, I suppose my fate lies elsewhere. That's all."
Owen's gaze hardened, his features sharpened by invisible tension. His jaw clenched as if restraining words he shouldn't say.
"Is something wrong, Lord MacKerran?" "Everything's just fine," he answered curtly. "We're approaching your uncle's home."
Brighde looked up and saw her family's imposing fortress on the hill.
Her heart tightened at the thought of what was to come. "Oh. Then stop here. I'll walk the rest of the way. I wouldn't want you to get in trouble because of me. I know my uncle doesn't hold you dear."
Eoghan clicked his tongue, but before he could answer he spotted a group descending from the stronghold. Their arrival had not gone unnoticed. Too late, he muttered with frustration. Brighde shivered with unease as she recognized her uncle and her father at the head of the group. Eoghan dismounted fluidly and helped her do the same.
They stood firm as the troop approached.
Tavish MacDara's face was a mask of distrust and severity. His dark eyes assessed the scene before speaking. "Dear uncle, I'll explain everything," Brighde said quickly. Tavish raised a hand to silence her.
"You're not the one I want to hear. I want to hear him. He's done nothing wrong, it was all my fault," she insisted, meeting her uncle's furious gaze without flinching. "I fell off the horse."
Tavish ignored her and turned to Eoghan with a cold stare.
"MacKerran, what are you doing on my lands?"
Eoghan shrugged with an impassive expression.
"I got lost."
Brighde stifled a nervous laugh, earning a warning glare from her uncle. Her father, however, looked at her with concern rather than anger. She knew a scolding was coming, but at least he seemed relieved to see her safe.
"Don't mock me,"
Tavish roared. Eoghan placed a hand on the hilt of his sword, his gaze steady and defiant.
"Do you doubt my word?"
The two men sized each other up in silence until Tavish scoffed with disdain.
"It's true you've learned to fight, MacKerran.
I've heard of your exploits in battle." He paused for a moment, his expression unreadable.
"Still, I don't trust you."
"Just as I never trusted your brother." Eoghan held the laird's gaze and replied with firm resolve.
"I'm well aware I shouldn't be here, and even less so with your niece.
Therefore, I'll accept whatever sentence you deem fit." Brighde felt the ground slip from under her. Did he not realize the danger he was in? Her uncle Tavish hated the MacKerrans, and that admission had just given him more reason to condemn him.
But her uncle had other plans.
"I've been told by a reliable source that you're to marry Ailis.
And since my niece is headed to court, you'll escort her and ensure her safety.
If anything happens to her, you'll answer for it with your life." A chilling dread crept through Brighde. Eoghan married to the princess. Why hadn't he told her?
And what did this order from her uncle mean? The truth struck her like a storm.
Her uncle was binding them with an invisible rope, tying their fates together in the cruelest way possible. If anything went wrong, Eoghan would pay with his life. The war between clans was on the brink of erupting. And she, without meaning to, had become the spark that could ignite the conflict. Eoghan watched Brighde with a hard gaze, a silent warning for her not to intervene. It would only fuel Tavish's resentment toward him, and his cousin's soldiers wouldn't need much to turn against him. And through him against the MacKerran clan, especially his brother. He forced himself to show respect to Tavish, though he didn't feel it deep down. He didn't want to fan a conflict that could lead to irreparable consequences. If Tavish wanted him to be Brighde's chaperone at court, then so be it.
No matter the cost. I accept.
"Let her go fetch her things," he ordered coldly without looking at Brighde. He had to forget the desire he felt for that woman, and quickly.
He had no right to want her.
He was engaged to another.
"Have I made myself clear, MacKerran?"
Tavish pressed.
"Perfectly.
"I'll protect her."
"I'll keep my word."
Tavish nodded stiffly and gave the order to depart. Brighde turned away, her expression unreadable. Her father approached Eoghan and solemnly extended his hand.
"I thank you for looking after my daughter, sir."
"You have my deepest gratitude."
"Nothing will happen to her."
"I'll look after her as if she were the apple of my eye," Eoghan assured him firmly. But in his mind doubt tormented him. Once he was married, how could he possibly keep that promise? The king had no qualms about taking young women to his bed. And the court was full of courtesans with questionable morals. He couldn't help clenching his fists. He would have to warn Brighde about what awaited her in Edinburgh.
But all in due time.
Brighde's father thanked him once more before going to fetch his mount. When the young woman was ready, she rode ahead of her father, and the small entourage set off, leaving Eoghan alone with his thoughts. Brighde quickly gathered her few belongings in a chest.
Her uncle's servants tied it to her mare, who had returned without her. Her mother embraced her through tears.
She hadn't stopped crying since Brighde had arrived at the castle. Brighde felt guilty, though she knew it wasn't her fault. Her uncle had decided, and everyone had to obey. She took her time explaining what had happened, assuring her that Eoghan MacKerran, despite his fearsome reputation, had acted with honor. She promised everything would be all right, and begged her not to worry. She kissed her parents one last time, and accepted the gold coin her father handed her. Then, unable to resist a final glance at the MacDara home, she mounted her horse. Two of her uncle's guards escorted her to where Eoghan was waiting. Upon arrival, they handed her over to him and left. Her uncle hadn't allowed any servant to accompany her.
But Brighde was used to fending for herself.
Eoghan rode off at a gallop without a word. Brighde had no choice but to keep up with his pace. She couldn't look back one last time.
If she wanted answers, she would have to wait. Even if he refused to speak, she would make sure to get them. Chapter 5. The wind can change the course of a battle, but only the heart can change the course of a life.
The sun was already low when Eoghan slowed his horse, forcing Brighde to do the same. They had ridden without pause for hours, and the toll of the journey was beginning to show on their bodies and dust-covered clothes. Before them, the stone walls of the MacKerran castle stood stark against the red-tinged sky.
"Why are we stopping here?"
Brighde asked, still trying to ignore the tension between them since leaving Dunlac. Eoghan didn't turn to look at her, as he answered firmly. "We need supplies and a change of clothes.
I can't arrive in Edinburgh like this."
Brighde frowned.
"I thought getting there quickly was the priority." "It is," he replied. "But I also need to inform my brother of our delay."
"If he knows we passed through Braemore, he'll understand the reason for the hold-up and avoid unnecessary speculation." Brighde nodded, though her expression showed lingering doubt.
"And how long will we stay here?" "Only as long as necessary," he said curtly. "I have no intention of dragging this journey out any more than I must."
Brighde held his gaze for a moment, trying to read what lay behind his words.
But she said nothing more and followed him in silence into the castle, bracing herself for the uncomfortable evening ahead.
Before them rose high stone walls. Gates opened at their approach and Brighde, relieved, slowed her pace. She pulled up beside him and said in a measured voice, "I'm truly sorry for imposing on you, and for the way my uncle treated you." "It's not your fault," he replied tersely. "I know, but may I ask you something?" "Not now," he interrupted, jumping down in one swift motion. He tossed the reins to a stable boy and barked, "See to Miss MacDara's chest. You follow me." Brighde watched him walk away. She wouldn't let him leave it at that. "Why are you angry if you say it's not my fault? Do you blame me or not?" Eoghan turned sharply. The people in the courtyard were watching, but Brighde didn't care. "I'm not angry." "Yes, you are. And I want to know why." Before he could respond, a voice interrupted the tense exchange. "Eoghan." At last. A man stepped through the doorway, followed by a woman with serene beauty carrying a baby in her arms. Brighde recognized Cian MacKerran. "We were wondering what had happened to you." Eoghan sighed and embraced his brother. "It's a long story. Cian, this is Brighde MacDara, Mairead's cousin." Cian's expression tightened at the mention of his first wife's name, but he quickly composed himself. "Welcome to our home, Brighde. This is my wife Katrina, and our son Malcolm." "Katie, please," Katrina corrected with a warm smile as she stepped forward. Brighde returned the smile. "A pleasure, Katie." "Good day, little one." The child looked at her with curiosity, and Brighde gently stroked his cheek. "Come in and rest," Katie offered. "I'll show you to your room right away." "Do whatever you please." Eoghan cut in sharply, earning a surprised look from his brother. Brighde ignored him and followed Katie inside.
As she walked through the halls, she couldn't stop thinking about him.
How could she ignore him when she was meant to stay by his side?
Chapter 6.
Eoghan sat across from his brother at the long dining table, where the men of the castle gathered for supper. He watched Cian carefully, searching for any trace of unease at Brighde's presence in their home. He knew her arrival could stir painful memories, but he wasn't responsible for her being within those walls. That guilt lay entirely with Tavish MacDara, who was clearly looking for a pretext for war. Had he known things would unfold this way, he would have left her in the forest clearing and gone home without a second thought.
But now it was too late.
Since the moment he met her, Brighde's image had haunted his mind, no matter how hard he tried to push her away. He felt betrayed by his own will, as if the more he fought to forget her, the deeper she carved herself into his memory.
Explain yourself,
Cian demanded suddenly, snapping him out of his thoughts. A servant had set down a pitcher of ale and 2 cups, filling them before retreating. Eoghan blinked and forced himself to focus on the present. Where to begin? He picked up the cup and took a long drink, trying to organize his thoughts.
It's not my fault, he burst out at last.
Cian watched him silently as he drank. His brother rarely showed such agitation.
What is that girl doing in our house? He asked again, more calmly this time.
Eoghan sighed and set the cup down.
She fell from her horse in front of me and fainted.
I took her to a cabin so she could rest, and we spent the night there. Cian raised an eyebrow.
Did you sleep with her?
Eoghan shot upright, offended.
No.
For God's sake, Cian, what do you take me for? His brother didn't look away.
I've seen the way you look at her.
Eoghan clenched his jaw.
Fine, I won't deny the thought crossed my mind, but that was before I knew who she was.
God, Cian, she's a MacDara. He remembered the exact moment Brighde revealed her identity.
It had knocked the breath out of him.
Though in truth he should have guessed, after all they were in MacDara territory.
If she'd been a village girl, maybe he wouldn't have questioned it so much, maybe he would have given in to temptation.
No woman had ever refused him, but Brighde was different.
He took pride in having resisted the urge.
If he had crossed that line, he'd be in serious trouble.
But the problem was, despite everything, he still wanted her. Where exactly did you find her?
Cian asked after a brief silence. In MacDara land. I crossed the border without realizing it.
It was hot, and I wanted to swim.
Cian clicked his tongue disapprovingly.
I know what you're going to say, Eoghan added, raising his hand. I shouldn't have gone so far, but I needed to get away.
Cian looked at him for a long moment, and a flicker of understanding lit his eyes.
I'm sorry, Eoghan.
For everything you have to carry on behalf of the clan. Eoghan clenched his fists on the table.
It's all right, brother. I know where I stand.
I won't fail you. You have my word. I'll protect Brighde MacDara just as her uncle asked.
I'll make sure nothing happens to her. And I'll marry the princess.
He paused, lowering his voice to a near whisper.
No matter the cost.
Cian nodded gravely.
Nothing can happen between the two of you, Eoghan, or it'll mean war. Tavish is just waiting for an excuse.
Eoghan drained his cup and poured himself another. Maybe the ale would help him forget that the woman he'd wanted from the moment he saw her was resting in one of the rooms of this very house, under his protection and completely out of reach.
He took another drink. I know, brother. Nothing will happen.
Cian watched him silently before murmuring.
She's beautiful.
Eoghan felt a sharp pang in his chest. God help him.
As if he wasn't already tormented enough.
He clenched his jaw and looked at his brother.
Was he thinking of Brighde?
Brighde shared some of her features, the same deep blue eyes, the same reddish hair. He didn't want to stir the pain Cian still carried, despite the happiness he now found with his wife and child. So he simply replied in a low voice,
Yes, brother. She's the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. But don't worry. As I promised you, I'll behave myself.
Cian gave a faint smile.
I know, Eoghan. I know I can trust you. And I know you won't let me down.
His brother's words touched him deeply, though he couldn't shake the feeling of overwhelming loneliness. For the first time in his life he felt truly lost.
Chapter 7. Love and war alike in both, only the brave triumph.
Twilight fell over the makeshift camp, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Light danced across the lake's surface, casting long shadows of the riders and their horses. Brighde felt fatigue seep into every inch of her body. The day had been long exhausting, and her limbs ached for rest. But beyond the physical weariness was the tension caused by Eoghan's cold indifference. While the guards lit the fire and secured the perimeter, Eoghan dismounted with the ease of a man well used to long days in the saddle. His movements were steady, controlled, as if fatigue didn't touch him. When he looked up and saw her still on her mare, a faint mocking smile tugged at his lips.
You can get down now, my lady, he growled in his deep voice. Unless you'd rather sleep on your horse's back.
Brighde pressed her lips together and dismounted with effort. The moment her boots touched the ground, a sharp pain shot through her legs, and she had to hold onto the saddle longer than she would have liked.
She took a deep breath before replying. Honestly, I'd rather spend the night with her than with you.
Eoghan let out a low, short laugh that rumbled in his chest like distant thunder. Brighde felt her skin prickle, not from the evening chill, but from something far more disturbing.
Did I say something funny? She snapped, narrowing her eyes. You can't walk, can you? He asked, crossing his arms.
Brighde clenched her jaw, refusing to give him the satisfaction, but her trembling legs betrayed her. She wouldn't let him see her weak. Not after enduring his disdain all day.
And whose fault is that?
I don't have your endurance.
I could have.
She cut herself off when she felt the sting in her eyes. Silently she cursed her own exhaustion. She wouldn't cry.
Not in front of him.
Before she could react, she felt the warmth of a hand on hers. Her fingers were still clenched around the reins, and Eoghan with surprising gentleness took them from her grip. His deep blue eyes searched hers with unsettling intensity.
I'll carry you.
You can stretch your legs in the lake, he said, his voice calm, so different from his usual tone that Brighde barely recognized it. She blinked a few times, trying to clear the moisture from her eyes, and nodded silently. Eoghan took hold of her waist, firm but not rough, and helped her down with more care than she expected. The moment her feet touched the ground, her legs gave out and a small gasp escaped her lips. Eoghan held her tighter, pulling her close to keep her from falling. Brighde felt the heat of his chest through the layers of clothing, the strength of his arms around her. Their breaths mingled, and for a heartbeat the world narrowed to that single point of contact. Their eyes locked, and something electric passed between them. Brighde felt a strange heat twist in her belly, a sensation she didn't quite understand. She pulled away abruptly, but her legs refused to cooperate, and she fell to the ground. Eoghan cursed under his breath, and without giving her time to protest, scooped her up with ease and carried her to a blanket near the fire. Brighde wanted to say something, anything to break the tension between them, but she was too drained. When he covered her with a blanket, Brighde shifted slightly and her fingers brushed against his. A shiver ran down her spine. He didn't pull his hand away, and for a moment time stilled again.
Sleep well, Eoghan whispered, his voice unexpectedly tender.
Brighde met his gaze one last time before sleep claimed her. She felt safe, sheltered, and for the first time since their departure she slept without fear of what the next day might bring. Eoghan halted his hand just before giving in to the urge to brush Brighde's cheek. Her skin looked so soft in the flickering firelight that he had to press his fingers into his own palm to resist the temptation. Instead he spread a blanket on the ground and sat beside her. While the guards set up camp a few meters away, he rummaged through his sack and pulled out a piece of bread, some dried meat, and an onion. He knew they'd need to hunt the next day. His men would handle it, along with the night watch. They were still on MacKerran land, so for now, he could allow himself a few hours of peace. His gaze drifted to Brighde, who slept with calm, steady breaths. He admired her courage. She hadn't complained once during the hellish journey he'd dragged her on for no real reason. If he were honest with himself, he'd admit he wasn't in any rush to reach Caerleon, where an unenviable fate awaited him. And if he were even more honest, he'd acknowledge that his behavior stemmed from a burning frustration. Brighde had taken up space in his mind he couldn't seem to clear. Her mere presence unsettled him, filled him with sensations he had no right to feel. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep. But the cold touch of his sword against his side did little to distract him from the fire raging inside. Then suddenly a scream tore through the stillness of dawn. He bolted upright, hand already on his sword. His heart dropped when he saw the empty blanket beside him, and the desperate splashing in the lake.
"Brighde!" he shouted, his voice thick with fear.
Without thinking, he threw off his cloak and ran to the shore. He plunged into the water without bothering to remove the rest of his clothes, swimming hard toward the figure flailing at the surface. When he reached her, her body felt limp, and a jolt of terror shot down his spine.
But the moment his arms wrapped around her, she clung to his shoulders and burst out laughing. "You're insane,"
Eoghan growled, shoving her away. Brighde's laughter rang out in the cold morning air. Through the thin fabric of her soaked shirt, her skin looked even paler, and her breasts were outlined with unsettling clarity in the dim light. A fierce heat surged in Eoghan's belly.
"Must you put yourself in danger all the time?" he muttered, turning his gaze away as he spun to leave the water. "I didn't ask you to save me, MacKerran," she replied haughtily.
Eoghan turned at once, his brow furrowed.
"Then next time I'll let you drown."
Brighde laughed again.
"I wasn't drowning, my lord. I was relaxing."
"With your face underwater."
"That's new."
"You could at least thank me instead of making up stories," he snapped, tossing her dress from the shore.
"And for the love of God, put that on."
She grabbed the garment and clutched it to her chest, still defiant.
"I know how to swim."
"I don't need rescuing every time I do something you don't understand. And in the future, I'd appreciate it if you refrained from such heroic impulses. It'll spare us both some awkwardness." Eoghan stared at her, his jaw tightening.
"Are you seriously blaming me for saving you in the forest?" he asked, incredulous. "Should I have left you to those bastards?" "I didn't say that, but—" "I heard you scream," he cut in, already losing patience. "Only because the water was cold. You should have turned around when you heard me." "I didn't hear you."
"I was relaxing, I told you," she insisted, stepping closer until they were face to face. The heat of her breath mixed with the morning chill. Her eyes burned with fury and something else, something Eoghan refused to name. He noticed how the wet shirt clung to her, revealing more than it should. His gaze dropped before he could stop it. His body reacted faster than his mind.
"Don't look at me like that," Brighde hissed, her voice a sharp warning.
Eoghan leaned in slightly, his breath brushing her ear.
"Doesn't seem like it bothers you, judging by your hard nipples."
She straightened, her cheeks flushed with color.
"That's because I'm cold." "And I know that's not the only reason," he snapped, catching her wrist midair before she could slap him. "I hate you,"
Brighde growled through clenched teeth. Eoghan let her go abruptly, as if her skin had burned him.
"Perfect. I hate you too. Now get dressed."
"We're leaving." Without giving her a chance to answer, he turned away, feeling the blood burn in his veins. He needed distance. If he stayed near her any longer, he wasn't sure how much more he could hold back.
Chapter 8.
In the court of Alistair III, the Caerleon castle. Scotland was a kingdom of uncertain borders, and oaths of loyalty sealed in blood. On the throne, King Alistair III of House MacDonald ruled with a firm hand from the majestic castle of Caerleon, an imposing fortress nestled in the hills of Lothian, not far from Edinburgh. Alistair III, aware of the tensions among the clans and the need to strengthen his hold, had decided to marry off his only daughter, Princess Ailis, to a suitor worthy of her lineage. One of the king's most loyal clans, the MacKerrans of Dunlac, had been chosen, while the O'Braes of Glenmara and the Fergusons of Lochvar had accepted the monarch's decision without enthusiasm. As they made their way toward the lists, Eoghan felt the rising anticipation in the air, a murmur of voices and the clink of goblets echoing through the festive atmosphere. King Alistair III, clad in armor that barely masked his imposing bulk, watched them approach with a welcoming smile, though his eyes betrayed nothing but disinterest masked as courtesy.
"Ah, look who has arrived," the monarch exclaimed jovially. "Our dear MacKerran."
Eoghan bowed his head with proper formality before speaking.
"Your Majesty, may I present Brighde MacDara, who has been appointed lady-in-waiting to Princess Ailis.
Her family entrusted me with her safety on the journey to court." Brighde executed a flawless curtsy, her composure unshaken despite the many inquisitive and lustful eyes fixed on her. One such burning gaze belonged to Conall, a relative of the Queen, whose stare lingered on the young woman with a boldness Eoghan found unbearable. "My lady, welcome to court," Conall murmured, his tone feigning warmth, though his intent was anything but. Brighde, unfazed, met the king's gaze as she answered in a sweet and measured voice.
"Your Majesty, my family and I are honored. It will be a pleasure to serve the princess."
The king let out a brief chuckle.
"Let's hope the princess feels the same.
She's inherited her mother's unruly temper." His eyes flicked to Eoghan with a hint of malice.
"You'll have your hands full, MacKerran. But I trust your exploits have taught you how to put a young lady in her place."
Eoghan smiled as if amused by the king's remark, though inwardly he burned with rage. Before he could reply, Conall raised his voice with a suggestion that drew a sharp tension into the air around them. "Sire, now that I've met this young lady, I've chosen my prize, a kiss. A kiss from this charming lady." Eoghan felt Brighde stiffen beside him. His gaze searched for hers, finding a silent plea, a flicker of contained fear in her eyes. Without thinking twice, he intervened.
"Let me compete, my lord," his voice rang out firmly. "For what, MacKerran?"
Conall mocked, a crooked smile on his face.
"You're already promised to the princess." "But I'm not married yet," Eoghan replied, not taking his eyes off the king. "Your Majesty."
The monarch shrugged indifferently. "Do as you please, MacKerran. It won't be the women who stop us from enjoying our pleasure, whether they're princesses or queens." He gave a dismissive bow.
"You have my blessing."
"Go prepare yourself." Eoghan asked for a horse, as his own was exhausted from the journey. The king, amused, pointed to his stables.
"Help yourself.
You can even use one of my armors."
"I appreciate your generosity, Your Majesty, but I must decline. I never fight in anything but my kilt."
Conall let out a derisive laugh.
"Always so proud to display that ridiculous Highland garment."
Eoghan took a step forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword.
"Are you calling me ridiculous, Conall?"
The king raised a hand between them, halting the growing hostility.
"Save your anger for the fight.
It will be a much more entertaining spectacle." Eoghan clenched his fists, determined. He wouldn't just fight to humiliate Conall, he would fight to ensure that Brighde wouldn't be touched by that despicable man. "Come, my lady, I'll take you to the princess," the king announced, offering his arm to Brighde, who accepted it with unwavering grace. As they walked away, Brighde turned her head, and her gaze met Eoghan's.
There was no fear in her eyes now, only determination.
She knew what was at stake, and she was ready for the battle just as he was.
"I can already taste her lips," Conall murmured, barely audible beside him.
Eoghan didn't dignify him with a look. He kept his gaze fixed on Brighde, who was disappearing among the ladies of the court.
"In your dreams, Conall."
The nobleman laughed condescendingly.
"It's you who's dreaming if you think you'll beat me, MacKerran."
This time Eoghan did look at him, and in his eyes gleamed a lethal threat.
"As long as I'm alive, you will never touch her."
Conall lowered his head with a mocking gesture.
"Then prepare to die."
Eoghan watched him walk away toward his horse. He felt the tension ripple through his body, but he didn't let it consume him. His time would come soon. From atop his steed, he searched for Brighde among the ladies of the court. There she was, apart from the others, her hair gleaming in the sunlight. Her hands were clenched over her chest, as if she held her destiny within them. She gave him a small nod. A subtle gesture, but enough. Eoghan held her gaze, and with the burning certainty that he was facing something more than just a duel, he made his way to the lists, ready to fight for Brighde's honor and his own. For the Highlands. For everything he wouldn't let be taken from him.
Chapter 9.
A vow made with the soul weighs more than 1,000 swords. Brighde kept her hands pressed to her chest, feeling the frantic beat of her heart as her gaze remained fixed on the two men in the center of the lists, preparing to face off. Around her, women's voices rose like a constant murmur, laughter and comments weaving together as if the very air was steeped in excitement so far removed from her anguish.
But none of it mattered.
Only he did. Eoghan. Her impetuous, reckless Eoghan. The madness of facing combat without armor, on a horse he didn't know, with nothing but his own resolve for protection, made her shudder. Uncertainty tightened around her chest, but so did fury, because she knew he wouldn't have accepted this challenge if it weren't for her. And still she couldn't take her eyes off him, off his upright, defiant figure, his proud and lethal stance. When the joust began, Brighde felt her breath sink with the pounding of the horse's hooves. The distance between the two men vanished in a blink, and then Eoghan's lance struck Connall's armor with brutal force, unseating him and sending him crashing to the ground. A sharp, broken gasp escaped her lips.
He had won.
Cries of amazement and joy rose among the ladies, many of them praising the Highlander's courage and skill. Brighde, however, had eyes only for Connall, who was slowly getting to his feet, fury blazing in his eyes as he looked at Eoghan. She understood at once, this was not an enemy who would forget such an insult. "My lord, you may kiss your wager," proclaimed the king with an amused smile, gesturing toward her. Brighde tensed, feeling the weight of every gaze land on her. She wasn't a prize or a trophy to be handed over as a reward for skill in battle. Damn it all. She wouldn't allow herself to be reduced to that. With a subtle lift of her chin, she signaled to Eoghan not to do it, even as the ladies' muffled giggles hinted they expected otherwise.
"You are not bound, my lord," she whispered, her voice barely audible, betraying her own resolve. But Eoghan didn't seem to hear her words.
He took a step toward her, and the world vanished. There were no expectant ladies, no princess watching with feigned indifference, no king delighting in the scene. Only him. Him and the intensity of his gaze.
And before she could react, his lips were on hers.
Time stopped. Brighde felt herself unraveling, her body trembling with an unfamiliar and overwhelming emotion. A sudden fire ignited inside her, stealing her breath, making her forget everything except the warmth of that contact. Instinct drove her to cling to him, to lose herself in the brush of his skin, in the restrained force of that kiss which, though brief, marked a clear before and after. Cheers and applause shattered the spell. Brighde pulled away, overwhelmed, her fingers rising to her lips, still feeling the heat of his.
"I shouldn't have done that," she murmured, not daring to look at him.
"Do you regret it?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous.
"No, but..."
Her gaze flicked just for a moment to the princess.
Didn't she look upset? "Aren't you afraid of the princess's wrath?"
Eoghan let out a deep laugh.
"You think this will make her turn me down? Have you used me, Brighde?"
She pressed her lips together, her cheeks burning with shame.
"You enjoyed it, so what's the problem?" he added, a teasing note in his voice.
Brighde felt indignation bubbling up inside her.
How dare he? "You are a terrible man, Eoghan MacKerran," she hissed, spinning on her heel. But he caught up to her easily, strolling at her side with casual ease. "Come on, don't be like that.
Admit it, you liked it." Brighde turned to glare at him.
"Of course not. In fact, let me tell you, you kiss terribly."
Eoghan laughed, with the confidence of a man who didn't believe a word of it.
"I doubt that. And I'm certain it was your first kiss."
Bride's heart skipped a beat.
Was it that obvious? What does it matter? She snapped, avoiding his gaze. He took her arm, stopping her.
His touch burned against her skin.
You could at least thank me for saving you again. Even if you didn't ask for it, not exactly.
She sighed, surrendering to the truth.
It's true, I didn't ask you. But I do thank you, Eoghan. Truly. He dipped his head with a smile. You're welcome. The pleasure was mine.
A shiver ran down Brighde's spine at those words.
She didn't understand this man.
He confused her, unraveled her. Defeated her.
You'll need to watch out for Connell, she said, resuming her steps. You made an enemy today.
Eoghan nodded calmly.
I know. But he's no match for me. He might try to hurt you. Maybe.
Time will tell. Brighde was quiet for a moment, then asked again.
If the princess chose not to marry you, do you think the king would allow it? Does it matter to you? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Not at all.
Just making conversation. Eoghan looked at her with a piercing gaze, as if he could see through her words.
Just talking.
Him.
Then tell me, what do you think of Caerlion?
Brighde turned away, forcing herself to focus on anything other than Eoghan's lips and what they still stirred in her.
It's a pretty palace. On the outside. And the princess? He asked, sounding almost careless.
Brighde frowned.
I thought she'd be more interested in you.
Eoghan let out a deep laugh.
The princess only cares about herself. Honestly, I doubt she even wants to marry me.
Brighde felt a weight lift from her chest. And yet at the same time a strange emotion crept over her.
And you? She asked softly. Don't you feel flattered to have been chosen?
Eoghan's smile faded.
If I'd had a choice, I would never have left the Highlands.
Brighde felt a sharp pang in her chest.
Neither would I, she whispered.
Their eyes met, and for a moment the world vanished. Eoghan lost himself in Brighde's eyes, those stormy oceans caught between reason and desire. For a second he believed she felt it too, that she was just as trapped in this whirlwind of emotion that threatened to consume him. And that kiss, he could still feel the echo of it burning through him like a fire he couldn't put out.
He had wanted her.
Fiercely. Painfully.
But he shouldn't. She wasn't meant for him.
He drew a slow breath, trying to steady himself to push the thoughts away. Why the hell had he said something like that?
I've only thought of you, had he lost his mind?
He couldn't let her believe that the impossibility of their situation tore at his soul, even if it was the truth. Brighde couldn't keep invading his thoughts. He had to remember who he was and what fate awaited him. He was betrothed to the princess, a woman who looked at him with disdain, who didn't bother to hide her resentment when she stood beside him and her father.
It didn't matter.
Even if she hated him, even if she thought him unworthy, the king was determined to see them married to secure his hold over the Highlands. Nothing would change that.
You're a good man, MacKerran, said Brighde suddenly, pulling him from his thoughts. His heart raced.
Did you doubt it? He replied, raising an eyebrow. She held his gaze for a few seconds before answering.
Let's just say your reputation doesn't help your case.
A tense silence settled between them. Eoghan felt a pang in his chest. Her opinion mattered more than he would ever admit. And now?
And now? He asked, unable to stop himself. Now I don't know, she admitted honestly. But maybe I can give you the benefit of the doubt. Let you prove yourself.
Brighde's words, which might have comforted him in another moment, only dragged him deeper into despair. Hadn't he already proven himself?
Haven't I done that? Don't you trust me?
She didn't look away as she answered, her honesty cutting deeper than it should have.
I won't lie to you, I don't trust you, Eoghan.
Her words pierced him like a sharpened blade. No woman's opinion had ever mattered to him before. Until now. He felt the urge to turn away and leave her to her fate, but the thought vanished as quickly as it came. He knew that in this world, carelessness could be fatal. Someone could come after her. Maybe the king hadn't taken kindly to him kissing a woman who wasn't his daughter. Maybe Connell was waiting for the perfect moment to strike back. Eoghan couldn't ignore those possibilities. He couldn't leave her unprotected. Damn it! What kind of mess have I gotten myself into this time?
And all because of a woman. But Brighde wasn't just any woman.
She had gotten into his head, yes, but also into something deeper, his soul. Without even realizing it, she had become someone infinitely important to him. "If I don't matter to you, then why do you care about my well-being?" he asked, his voice hoarse and low. He knew he shouldn't make himself so vulnerable, but the doubt was eating him alive. He wanted to know. Needed to know. Brighde didn't answer right away. Her expression softened, and when she finally spoke, her tone was gentle, almost a whisper that wrapped around his senses.
"What makes you think I don't care about you, Eoghan?"
Something stirred inside him, something unfamiliar but incredibly warm. His mind tried once again to remind him that she wasn't meant for him.
But his heart refused to listen. "On the contrary," Brighde continued, "I do care about you.
You're meant to protect me, it's the least I can do, isn't it?" Eoghan felt a hollow ache in his chest at her words. So that was all it was. A simple exchange of good intentions. They were to be allies in a court that wasn't openly hostile, but certainly dangerous.
Nothing more. He'd have to accept it. Just as she seemed to be doing. And let whatever must happen, happen. Chapter 10.
"Forgive my intrusion, my lord," Brighde announced firmly, though her heart thundered in her chest. Eoghan tilted his head and looked at her closely, as if trying to decipher the thoughts hidden behind those deep blue eyes. There was no trace of anger in him, for her sudden appearance in his chambers.
On the contrary, his expression was calm, yet inquisitive. "And to what do I owe your unexpected visit?" he asked gently, taking a step toward her.
Brighde fought to maintain her composure, holding the parchment with steady hands.
"Princess Ailis has ordered me to deliver this to you."
"She expects an immediate reply," she explained, extending the missive. Eoghan took the paper, and in the process his fingers brushed against hers, sending a jolt through her skin. Brighde cursed her body's reaction. She couldn't afford to falter, not now.
The Highlander unfolded the document and scanned its lines, his brow furrowed.
Brighde watched as his expression shifted from curiosity to deep contemplation. Something in the words disturbed him, though his face revealed little more. Finally he folded the parchment calmly and held it in his hands, his gaze fixed on her. "Tell the princess I will attend to her request in due time," he said, his voice firm but devoid of submission. Brighde nodded and turned to leave, but before she could take a step, Eoghan leaned his head slightly toward her.
"Are you all right?" he asked in a whisper.
She tensed. She hadn't expected such direct concern from him. For a moment she was tempted to be honest, to confess how unsettled her heart had been since arriving at court.
But she held back. "Of course," she replied with a practiced smile. "I'm doing my duty."
Eoghan didn't seem convinced, but he didn't press her. He simply inclined his head and stepped aside, granting her the path to the door. Brighde felt a lump rise in her throat as she walked away. With each step her resolve to keep her distance wavered.
And still she had to be strong.
She crossed the threshold without daring to look back. Out in the corridor she drew a deep breath, and prepared to return to the princess.
There was nothing to do but carry on.
Eoghan watched her go, and with every step Brighde took, something inside him tore apart. For a moment, when she had appeared in his room, he'd thought himself the victim of a sweet hallucination. A part of him, the most naive, or perhaps the most desperate, had wanted to believe she had come of her own free will, that she had finally surrendered to the inevitable, that she would finally be his.
But that illusion shattered as quickly as it had formed. No. That would never happen.
"Damn it, Eoghan, get a hold of yourself," he cursed silently. Brighde wasn't his.
She never would be.
And the sooner he accepted that, the sooner he could free himself from the torment of wanting her with every fiber of his being. He sighed, forcing his mind away from the image of her silhouette, and turned his attention back to the message in his hands. The princess's flawless handwriting stared back at him from the parchment, like an inescapable sentence. Since the king my father wishes us to get acquainted, accept my lord to be my knight during the feast. A shiver ran down his spine. With a growl he crushed the parchment in his fist and threw it into the fire. He watched the flames devour the words, reducing them to ashes. Like his heart. Like his will. Brighde was his curse. From the moment he had tasted her lips, nothing had been the same. His mind was trapped in the prison of that memory, in the warmth of her skin, the sweetness of her mouth.
He thought of her day and night.
Before that kiss, his longing had already been a punishment, now it had become unbearable torture. 1,000 times he asked himself what he should do. 1,000 times he came to the same conclusion, he had to have her. Only then could he rid himself of her image. Only then could he tame the desire that consumed him.
But Brighde wasn't a woman he could take and forget.
She wasn't just another conquest. If he made her his, there would be consequences he couldn't afford.
Not just with the MacDara, not just with his own family, but with the king himself.
He leaned against the fireplace, dropping his head into his arms. The battle inside him was tearing him apart.
Brighde is not for you, he whispered, as if saying it out loud might make him believe it. He had to forget her.
His life couldn't be ruled by a carnal whim, by a desire as fierce as it was foolish. Honor, reason, duty, those were meant to guide him.
But he had never been a patient man, much less a prudent one. He slammed his fist against the stone.
Damn it.
It wasn't that part of him that should be leading his actions, it was his head. But he felt like he was losing it. The more he tried to stay away from Brighde, the more he needed her.
And he knew it, with terrifying certainty. If he didn't find a way to silence that desire, he would lose his mind.
Chapter 11.
As soon as Eoghan crossed the ballroom doors, the murmur of the crowd washed over him like a restrained tide. The glow of the chandeliers and the lavish decor, with golden fabrics and tables overflowing with delicacies, failed to distract him from his true purpose. His eyes swept the room with barely concealed urgency, searching for a familiar figure, a fiery head of hair among the throng. Princess Ailis sat on her throne, surrounded by her closest ladies-in-waiting, who laughed and whispered with the careless ease of those who knew they were untouchable.
But Brighde was not among them.
Unease stirred within him, but he forced himself to remain composed. She couldn't be far, perhaps the princess had sent her on an errand.
Yes, he would find her soon. After all, wasn't he sworn to protect her? As he made his way toward the throne, eyes turned to him.
He had to project the perfect image, even if his thoughts were elsewhere. He cursed his fate, and the obligation to present himself courteously before a court he cared little for. He paid almost no attention to the glances some of the ladies cast his way, some eager, others scornful, like that of Sybil Cunningham, one of Alice's favourites. Her disdain for him had been clear since the day they were introduced. "Could you not dress like everyone else, Lord MacKerran, instead of parading around in that grotesque costume?" she said with a sarcastic smile, drawing muffled laughter from her companions. Eoghan raised an eyebrow and with a mocking bow, replied dryly,
"I'll never deny who I am or where I come from, Princess. You needn't worry."
Ailis sighed with disdain, assessing him with the same look of superiority she reserved for everything around her.
"Tell me at least, do you know how to dance?" she asked, a hint of mockery in her tone. But Eoghan wasn't listening.
At that very moment among the dancers, his gaze found the figure he had been searching for. Brighde. His heart slammed against his chest as he saw her twirl gracefully in Connell's arms. Her forest green gown flowed around her, making her seem ethereal, untouchable. Laughter lit up her face, her eyes sparkled with a brilliance that took his breath away.
But that glow wasn't for him. It was for Connell. and the sight of it set his blood aflame. An irrational heat surged through his veins.
Had he forgotten how that man had looked at her before, with predator's hunger? If Conall hadn't understood that Brighde was under his protection, he would remind him.
"My lord," the princess pressed, irritated by his silence. "No, princess, I don't know how to dance," he finally said, his eyes never leaving Brighde.
And yet on a sudden impulse, he committed to memory the simple steps of the courtly dance, and offered the princess his hand.
"But if the exercise pleases you, come with me."
Ailis blinked, surprised. Then, with a smile that barely masked her satisfaction, she placed her fingers gracefully on his and rose.
"If you promise not to step on me, I accept. After all, my father is watching, so try to look pleased."
Eoghan couldn't care less what the king thought. The only thing that mattered was the woman dancing just a few steps away, laughter still on her lips, her body twirling with effortless grace. His gaze met Bride's. A fleeting, eternal moment. The music swept them into an inevitable choreography, their bodies drawing near and pulling apart, bound by the same melody. Every time Brighde turned and faced him again, his breath caught. In her eyes he saw the same fire that burned within him. A fire that shouldn't exist. When the music shifted and the couple's dance began, he had no choice but to bow to his dance partner. Brighde did the same with Conall.
But this time, when she extended her hand, she hesitated for just a heartbeat before placing her fingers in his.
Eoghan held them gently and led her through the dance. Every turn, every brush of her skin against his, was torment. Forbidden pleasure. The murmurs in the hall grew louder. Stifled laughter, curious glances.
Too many eyes on them.
Eoghan noticed, and deep inside an alarm flared. So did Princess Ailis. Suddenly, Ailis stopped dancing.
"Let's get some air, my lord. It's stifling in here," she said, placing a hand on Eoghan's arm. "Your wish is my command, princess," he replied, bowing with practiced ceremony.
He felt Bride's gaze on him, questioning, confused.
And just before he turned away, he gave her one last look, heavy with unspoken meaning, a silent apology. He didn't know if she understood it.
Perhaps, he thought bitterly, it was better if she didn't. Brighde could still feel the burn on her skin, the shadow of Conall's fingers that had gripped her wrist too tightly.
Her heart pounded violently, not just from fear but from rage.
There was no doubt in her mind that the man was dangerous, and if Eoghan hadn't intervened, she didn't want to imagine it. She hurried after him, feeling his firm hand wrapped around hers, guiding her away from the scene. Their footsteps were barely audible on the cold stone floor, but the silence wasn't enough to quiet the storm inside her. Fear mixed with frustration, and the tension between them thickened with every passing second. Eoghan came to a sudden stop and pulled her behind some shrubs, shielding her from prying eyes. His gaze burned, filled with an emotion she couldn't name.
"When will you learn to take care of yourself?" he growled, impatience lacing every word.
Brighde blinked, stunned. A scolding was the last thing she expected. Did he not understand what had just happened?
Her fear, her helplessness, why was he blaming her? "I'm tired of you constantly blaming me for putting myself in danger when I'm the victim," she snapped. "I didn't ask for what just happened, Eoghan."
His jaw clenched.
"You danced with him."
Brighde stared at him, disbelief flooding her expression.
That was what bothered him.
His petty, meaningless interpretation of a dance she hadn't wanted at all.
"So what?"
Her voice was sharp as steel.
"Just because I accepted a dance, doesn't mean I owe him anything else. And I will dance with other men.
If I want to find a good match to marry, isn't that what I'm supposed to do?" Eoghan's eyes darkened.
"Is that what you're hoping for coming here? To find a husband?" "Of course. I don't plan on growing old alone."
"You're marrying the princess, aren't you?"
The words stung as she said them. "Not him, Brighde. That man's a pig. He's not the first to claim a kiss without my consent. And—"
She stopped when she saw the fury in his eyes. The intensity in Eoghan's gaze pierced straight through her.
"Don't you dare compare me to him," he growled. And don't you dare interfere in my life, she shot back with equal resolve, lifting her chin in defiance. The spark between them ignited like a dormant flame.
Brighde felt the weight of Eoghan's nearness, the heat of his body surrounding her and stealing her breath. For a moment she thought he would give in, that their lips would meet.
But he didn't.
Instead, he let her go with a sudden, almost violent gesture. "Tomorrow I'll write to my uncle," she announced firmly.
"He'll understand. I'll go back to the others."
He stepped away but hadn't taken 3 paces before she felt his hand close around hers again.
"Don't do that, Brighde.
Don't write to him.
I have to keep looking after you."
The intensity in his eyes stole the air from her lungs. "Why would you, when you hate me?"
He didn't answer right away.
His gaze dropped to her lips, and his voice became a whisper.
"I don't hate you, Brighde."
The shiver that ran through her was involuntary. She waited, heart pounding in her chest.
But then Eoghan withdrew his hand and once more cloaked himself in that sharp, cutting coldness.
"I gave my word to your uncle that I would look after you, and I'll honor that promise." A promise.
Nothing more.
Why had she allowed herself to hope, even for a moment?
"You're not letting go because I'm the one ending this madness," she murmured, a bitter smile tugging at her lips. "I told you my uncle will understand.
Especially if I let him believe I've found a husband who'll take care of me in your place." She watched with satisfaction as Eoghan's jaw clenched.
"That's not true." "No, but it will be soon," she said with conviction. "I have to think about my future, Eoghan."
"Because you will never be mine." There was a silence then, a suspended moment where desire and resignation collided between them.
At last Eoghan exhaled. "You're right. I can't stop you from living your life."
Brighde nodded firmly, though something inside her cracked.
"Exactly.
From now on there's no need to defend me or interfere in my decisions." She took a step closer, lifting her chin with one final challenge.
"Let me tell you something, MacKerran. I'm eager to find a man to share my life with just so I can be rid of you. Now if you'll excuse me, duty calls."
She turned and walked away with determined steps, not allowing herself to look back. But inside her chest, a storm of emotions tore her apart. Eoghan didn't stop her.
And that hurt more than any words could.
Chapter 12. Eoghan walked across the hall with firm steps, feeling the weight of every gaze fixed on him.
He didn't care.
His only purpose at that moment was to find the king, and request a mission that would take him far from that place before he lost his mind. However, his resolve wavered the moment Brighde began to sing. Her voice, steeped in the essence of the Highlands, struck him like a gale, carrying him back to his home, his people, the life he longed for with desperate yearning. When the song ended, silence swept through the hall, broken only by murmurs of admiration from those present. Eoghan let out a trembling sigh, trying to regain his composure.
That was when Brighde stepped down from the platform and walked toward the princess.
Without thinking, he took a step in her direction.
"Brighde," his voice was deeper than he had intended. She froze and looked up at him.
Her eyes, reflections of an unfathomable sea, showed surprise and a flicker of unease. "My lord," she replied with a slight bow of her head, maintaining her poise.
He frowned. That coldness was unbearable.
The woman who had enchanted him with her voice, the same one who laughed so freely when she thought no one was watching, now stood distant, as if they shared no common past, as if he didn't spend every damned night thinking of her.
"I need to speak with you," he murmured, leaning slightly so only she could hear.
Brighde swallowed hard, her pulse quickening in betrayal. She knew she should refuse, step away from him, uphold the distance her duty demanded. But his eyes caught her in a gaze so intense it left her speechless.
"This isn't wise," she whispered, struggling to keep her composure. "Neither is staying here," he replied, a half smile tugging at his lips though it never reached his eyes.
Brighde hesitated. She knew each word they exchanged brought them closer to the edge of something dangerous.
But she also knew he wouldn't stop.
And deep down she wasn't sure she wanted him to.
"Just a few minutes," she relented at last.
He nodded and with forced discretion led her toward an adjacent gallery, away from the curious stares.
The tension between them was palpable, an invisible thread binding them in a perilous clash of wills. "You need to stop avoiding me," he said, crossing his arms over his chest.
"Avoiding you?" Brighde let out a short, humorless laugh.
"And what am I supposed to do, Owen?
Pretend nothing has changed?
That our lives aren't dictated by others?"
He clenched his fists, his jaw tight.
"It wasn't supposed to be this way," he whispered bitterly. "If only." "No," she cut him off, a flicker of sorrow in her eyes. "We can't think about what could have been.
Only what is." Silence fell over them like a sentence. Owen watched her intently, searching her face for an answer he didn't dare voice.
At last he sighed and nodded with resignation. "You're right," he admitted, though every word felt like a weight. "But still, I had to see you one last time before I go."
Brighde felt her breath catch.
"You're leaving?" "At dawn tomorrow."
The words hung between them, heavy with everything they didn't dare say. And then without warning, Owen raised a hand and brushed his fingers against Bride's cheek, a fleeting but powerful gesture.
She didn't pull away.
She closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself to imprint the feeling into her memory. When she opened them, he had already stepped back. "Goodbye, Brighde." Without waiting for a reply, Owen turned on his heels and disappeared into the shadows of the corridor, leaving behind a void impossible to fill. Brighde stood still, feeling the weight of the farewell in every fiber of her being. She closed her eyes and let out a trembling sigh. She knew she had to forget him, that her fate had been sealed long ago.
But deep in her heart, a small rebellious hope refused to die.
Brighde watched Owen's tall figure disappear into the crowd, while applause still echoed around her. Her song had won over the court, but the only recognition she craved vanished with every step he took away from her. Why was he running? Had he finally understood what she had tried so hard to hide from him? Had he realized how fiercely she longed for him, how she dreamed of his lips, his body, his embrace?
The thoughts tormented her, but her pride forced her to keep her composure.
She responded politely to the compliments, allowing herself to be led to the banquet, where she shared a few cups of ale with the princess and some other young women.
Yet the drink did nothing to calm the storm within her.
She wanted Owen out of her mind, but it was useless. Day and night she summoned him, especially in her dreams, where he claimed her with such intensity it left her trembling even after waking. "Thank you for blessing us with such a beautiful song, Brighde. Your voice is divine," said a voice nearby. She turned her head and met the blue gaze of Jasper Seaton. Always dressed to perfection, he looked at her with that smile meant to be charming, though it never stirred her heart.
"Thank you, my lord."
"Do you sing as well?"
"God, no.
I leave that to my sisters," he laughed, wearing his usual air of self-satisfaction. He handed her a cup of ale after filling it, and took a sip before adding,
"May I ask you something?"
Brighde raised an eyebrow with curiosity.
"Depends on what you want to know." "It's about Eoghan MacKerran. I've heard there's something between you two." A chill ran down her spine, but she quickly gathered herself. "You've been misinformed, Jasper. There's nothing between us, and I'll remind you he's promised to the princess." "But you arrived at court together."
"When I asked about you, I was told to keep my distance, as you were under MacKerran's protection. They even hinted he wouldn't hesitate to use his fists for your sake." Brighde felt a knot tighten in her stomach. What right did Owen have to scare off her suitors? If he was going to marry, he had no claim over her life. Determined to confront him, she left the banquet and made her way through the corridors of the fortress. When she reached the grand staircase leading to her chambers, she halted at the sound of voices.
She stepped back and hid in the shadow of a pillar.
Her heart pounded as she recognized Owen's deep voice and the melodic laugh of Ailis. "Thank you, Ailis," Owen said.
"I'm off to see the king. Shall we meet later? At the ball?" "Of course. Nothing would make me happier."
Brighde felt her chest tighten at the way he leaned his head toward the princess, his lips nearly brushing her skin in a gallant gesture. A knot of jealousy, fury and pain lodged in her throat.
So it had all been a lie.
Why had he insisted he didn't want the marriage, if he could smile so easily in the princess's presence? She had dared to believe he was different, not like the other courtmen with their masks and falsehoods.
But now it was clear. She had been a fool.
She took a deep breath and turned to leave, only to be stopped by a strong figure stepping into her path. She didn't have time to react before firm hands caught her hips to keep her from falling. A shameful heat spread through her at the contact.
"Don't touch me," she hissed, pulling away sharply.
Eoghan looked at her in surprise, his expression darkened by confusion.
"Then don't fall into my arms," he replied with a crooked smile, the one that maddened and drew her in all at once.
Fury ignited in her veins. She wasn't going to let him toy with her, like he did with everyone else. She lifted her chin and met his gaze with cold resolve.
"Don't worry, it won't happen again."
And without waiting for a reply, she turned on her heels and walked away, leaving Eoghan with an unreadable expression on his face.
Chapter 13.
The guards stationed before the king's chambers opened the door with reverence, allowing Eoghan to enter.
As soon as he crossed the threshold, he felt the enveloping warmth of the fire burning in the hearth, and took in the room with care.
The small sitting room leading to the royal apartments was lit by candelabras, their flames swaying gently, casting dancing shadows on the tapestry-covered walls. Heavy, richly embroidered curtains fell from the windows, giving the room a solemn and majestic air. Eoghan walked calmly, surveying the chamber as he waited. He disliked being kept waiting, but he understood that Alistair III had every right to make him do so. He drew a deep breath, trying to dispel the unease creeping over him.
What did the king want from him? The question unsettled him more than he cared to admit.
Was it to formalize his betrothal? Or perhaps it concerned matters at the border, ever uncertain with England, or some new request from their French allies. His interest in politics was minimal, but if he wanted to remain at court and be counted among the Royal Navy's commanders, he would have to learn how to navigate the complex web of alliances. A thought that brought him no pleasure. While examining a hunting painting, clumsily executed, his thoughts drifted to Ailis. Something in her expression had seemed troubled when she came to find him. He had wanted to ask her directly, but she had offered no more information than strictly necessary. He recalled his own reaction. He had deflected her insistence with smiles and fleeting caresses, though deep down a quiet worry had taken root and now returned in full force. A rustle of fabric interrupted his thoughts. "My dear MacKerran," the voice rang out with authority, and a hint of camaraderie. Eoghan turned slowly to find himself facing the imposing figure of Alistair III. Despite his heavy build and disproportionate features, the monarch carried an unquestionable presence. His ceremonial garb, pitch black, gleamed under the candlelight, and the rings on his fingers caught golden glints. Eoghan inclined his head respectfully.
"My lord, you called for me. What can I do for you?"
The king gestured toward the nearby chairs, and settled in with deliberate calm before speaking in his characteristically direct tone.
"I'll get straight to the point, MacKerran."
Alistair rested his elbows on the armrests and interlaced his fingers.
"Ailis has stepped down. She doesn't want to marry you."
Eoghan felt a sudden wave of relief, though he quickly masked it. He cleared his throat lightly and kept his expression neutral.
"Oh. I'm sorry, my lord,
The king raised a hand, silencing him with a gesture.
"It's not your fault.
You've done what you could, but she's been adamant.
She wants nothing to do with you."
Eoghan nodded gravely, though inside he rejoiced at the news. His freedom was being returned to him, though now the question of Brighde loomed. The thought of leaving her now felt uncomfortable, and a sharp pang of unease passed through him.
"Apparently she loves another man," the king went on. "Under my law, I've agreed to let her marry him. It's Jasper Seaton."
Eoghan smiled with feigned courtesy.
I know who he is, my lord.
The princess could not find a more gallant man.
They'll make a fine match.
The monarch nodded, pleased by his diplomacy.
I wanted to inform you before announcing the engagement publicly. I hope you understand.
Of course, my lord. I appreciate your consideration. The king observed him for a moment, before shifting the tone of the conversation.
I almost forgot.
Connell has asked to marry Brighde MacDara.
You know her better than anyone. What do you think of that union?
The mention of Connell made Owen's relief vanish instantly.
He straightened in his seat, his expression hardening.
Do not let her marry that man, my lord, he said firmly.
He is not to be trusted.
The king's eyes narrowed with suspicion.
That's a serious accusation, MacKerran. I'm aware, my lord.
I know he is close to you, but he remains a despicable man. I caught him forcing himself on Brighde.
Had I not intervened, he would have.
He stopped himself, fists clenched with restrained fury. The monarch frowned, visibly troubled.
I knew Connell was impulsive, but I never imagined he would go that far.
I cannot tolerate such behavior under my roof.
I'll send him back to his lands first thing tomorrow.
Owen took a deep breath, relieved, but the weight in his chest didn't fully lift. Something still stirred uneasily inside him. His voice emerged before he could hold it back.
Give her to me, my lord.
The words escaped his lips before he could consider the consequences. As compensation for the marriage that will not happen with your daughter. The king studied him carefully, weighing his words. Then, to Owen's surprise, he smiled with a trace of satisfaction.
I suppose I owe you that, MacKerran.
The monarch leaned back in his chair, pleased.
I can trust you, and your alliance is valuable to me. But tell me. You have my loyalty, my lord.
If you need me, you need only call, and I will come at once, so will my clan.
If you agree to give me Brighde.
The king considered his response for a moment before nodding.
Will I be able to count on your clan to strengthen my forces and march to war if needed?
Owen inclined his head slightly.
Yes, my lord.
You have my word. The monarch smiled with satisfaction.
Then so it shall be.
However, we will keep this secret until the time is right. Owen bowed once more, fully aware that he had sealed both his fate and Brighde's in a single stroke. He had no right to marry her, but then again he had no choice. Owen scanned the ballroom, searching anxiously among the guests. His heart pounded, not from the music or the noise of the celebration, but because he needed to see her. Brighde. Her mere presence could unravel his thoughts, and ignite a fire within him he still didn't fully understand.
But no matter how hard he searched the crowd, he couldn't find her wild hair or slender figure.
He moved purposefully through the gathering until, at last, he saw her. Brighde stood on the terrace, leaning against the wall, staring into the vastness of the night. He approached with steady yet hesitant steps. He didn't know how to begin, didn't know what to say. His world, so controlled, so secure, wavered every time he was near her. He placed his hands gently on her shoulders, hoping to catch her attention without startling her.
But she tensed under his touch.
She spun around sharply, her eyes blazing with fury.
How dare you, she growled, pulling away. How dare you touch me, when everyone knows you're going to marry the princess? That's enough, Owen. I don't ever want to see you again. And without giving him a chance to reply, she turned on her heel and ran down the stairs, disappearing into the gardens.
Owen cursed under his breath. The woman's stubbornness was legendary, but this time he couldn't let her go.
Not now.
Not when fate had already drawn a path they could no longer escape.
Brighde, he shouted, his voice echoing into the night. I must speak with you.
I command you to listen to me.
She didn't stop.
He followed without hesitation, his quick strides closing the distance between them. Just when he thought he'd lost her, she came to a sudden halt. She turned on her heel, her chest heaving, hair tousled, lips parted. Her expression was a challenge in itself.
I'm sorry.
Could you repeat that? She whispered, frowning. Eoghan looked at her, captivated by her fierceness. She was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, and in her gaze burned an intensity capable of turning everything to ash. He stepped closer, a crooked smile forming on his lips.
How am I looking at you, Brighde? He asked softly. It doesn't matter how. I'm not one of your countless lovers.
There was defiance in her voice, but also in her eyes. They stood locked in a silent standoff, until Eoghan could no longer hold back. With a decisive movement, he grabbed her by the waist and pulled her to him, capturing her lips in a kiss that was intense, fierce, and filled with the passion he had restrained for too long. He felt her initial resistance, the brief moment of hesitation, and then her surrender.
Her hands clutched his hair, returning the kiss with the same desperation he felt. The world seemed to disappear.
There was only them, the heat of their mouths, the insatiable need to be closer still. His hands slid down the curve of her back, their bodies fitting together perfectly. Until suddenly Brighde pulled away with force.
How dare you, she snapped, her face flushed and eyes blazing with fury. I will never be a distraction, MacKerran.
Eoghan pressed his lips together. He knew he had hurt her, that he had crossed a line he perhaps never should have.
But there was no turning back.
Their fates were now entwined, whether they liked it or not.
It's my right as your future husband, he said firmly.
Brighde went pale. Her disbelief showed instantly on her face.
Excuse me. You heard me, Brighde.
The king wanted to give you to Conall, and I offered myself instead. She brought a hand to her lips, swaying slightly. Her breathing turned erratic, as if trying to process the news.
The princess doesn't wish to marry me, Eoghan continued, trying to ease the tension. That's what the king was going to tell me when he summoned me to his chambers.
I was about to leave, when he mentioned Conall intended to marry you.
I couldn't allow it.
Brighde stepped back, horror flickering in her eyes.
But I never asked you for anything, she cried, her voice breaking. I know. But don't tell me you would have accepted marrying him. She didn't respond.
Her silence said enough.
Women don't have a say in these matters, he added more gently. So don't act like a child and accept to marry me, Brighde.
For your own safety. Brighde closed her eyes for a moment, as if struggling against emotions threatening to overwhelm her.
And the princess, she asked softly. She wants nothing to do with me. And you?
She looked up at him straight in the eye.
You seem to care for her.
Every time I saw you together, you were kissing her. Eoghan felt a flicker of satisfaction at the jealousy veiled in her voice.
Are you jealous? He asked with a sly smile.
Brighde scoffed and looked away.
Of course not.
Don't flatter yourself, MacKerran. So, if I understand correctly, I'm nothing more than a consolation prize.
He shook his head. It was to save you, Brighde. I didn't think.
She exhaled in frustration and ran a hand through her hair.
I must inform my family. We can't. It would be dangerous. I'll take care of everything.
Brighde seemed to waver.
Her eyes searched his, perhaps looking for some certainty amid the chaos. At last she exhaled and spoke in a low voice. You're asking me to choose between two evils. I hope you know where you're leading us.
Eoghan held her gaze with unwavering resolve.
Choose, Brighde.
And quickly. She drew a deep breath, her chest rising and falling under the weight of the decision. And then she chose.
Chapter 14.
Duty forges the path, but love decides if we follow it. 3 days later, Brighde was preparing to marry Eoghan at the Abbey of Caerleon beside the castle, in an intimate ceremony carefully kept secret. The king had kept his word, and arranged everything for the union to take place. And there was Eoghan, the man she admired with her soul, the warrior who had filled her thoughts for so long. Dressed in his kilt, he radiated that untamed strength that fascinated her so deeply.
But something about him felt wrong.
Since she had agreed to marry him, Eoghan had become distant, evasive. Hadn't he been the one who kissed her with such intensity that her resistance shattered? Hadn't he defied the king to make her his wife? And now, standing before her, his eyes burned with a strange fire, at times desire, at others an impenetrable wall. She clasped his hands, trying not to show how much his indifference hurt. While the priest recited the vows, Eoghan barely looked at her.
And when he finally said, "I do," it came out in a hoarse whisper, as if every word weighed heavily on his soul.
Then a chaste kiss, more of an excuse than anything, sealed their union. Brighde felt a knot rise in her throat. Dinner was a torment. Eoghan didn't speak to her, he only drank. Glass after glass, until Brighde understood his purpose. He was trying to get drunk to face the wedding night.
Was he trying to forget he had married her? She fought back tears. She was a MacDara.
MacDara women did not cry in public. When the time came to withdraw, she followed him, with a mix of relief and dread. There were no jokes or laughter among the guests, only furtive glances and uncomfortable silences. She promised herself she would demand answers, but not yet.
Not with rage boiling in her chest.
Not while watching him stagger, gripping the walls. He entered the room first. Charming.
He hadn't even waited for her.
Brighde took a deep breath, and with the dignity of a queen began to undress.
She felt his gaze on her but didn't turn around.
If he wanted to ignore her, she would do the same. She let her dress fall, standing bare, waiting for him to react.
But all she heard was the door slam shut. He had left. The humiliation hit her full force.
She slipped on the delicate white nightgown Orla had prepared, and poured herself a glass of whiskey. The liquor burned her throat, but not as much as the fury beginning to spark in her chest.
What the hell was wrong with that man?
She vowed not to cry, not to lower herself.
But after a few minutes, she couldn't take it anymore.
She left the room with purpose and found him in the parlor, standing with his back to the fireplace.
"If you didn't want to marry me, why did you?" She attacked him without hesitation, her voice taut with restraint.
Eoghan lifted his gaze and sighed.
"It's not that, Brighde." "Then what is it?" "I have a right to know."
"I'm your wife. You owe me that, don't you?"
"Yes, you're my wife," he murmured. "But you and I both know you can't really be."
Brighde felt the ground vanish beneath her feet.
"I don't understand."
"Ever since we married, you've treated me like a stranger." She stepped closer and took his arm.
"Eoghan, tell me what's going on."
"Please." His eyes ran over her with a heat that contradicted his coldness, but he didn't move.
"Don't you want me?" "Is that it?" she insisted, her voice trembling. "It's not that, Brighde." "Then tell me the truth."
"Do you still love the princess? Do you regret saving me?"
"I didn't ask you for anything, Eoghan," she cried bitterly. "Why are you making me pay for it?"
Eoghan closed his eyes, as if her words wounded him.
But when he spoke, his voice was a lethal whisper. "Yes, I love the princess."
Brighde felt her heart shatter into pieces.
The tears she had fought so hard to contain escaped without mercy.
She pressed against him, searching for comfort that never came. Eoghan remained still, offering no trace of tenderness.
"Why?" she sobbed. "I wanted a grand future," he murmured bitterly.
"And instead I'll always be second best." Brighde stepped back, outraged.
"You can't be serious." "It's the truth," he replied, looking at her for the first time with a hardness that stole her breath. But Brighde wasn't intimidated.
She lifted her chin and challenged him.
"You're lying."
She stepped toward him and slid her arms around his neck, forcing him to feel her closeness. She felt him shudder at her touch, and it gave her strength.
"You want me, Eoghan," she murmured against his lips. "I see it.
I know it.
And I want you too. I want to be your wife."
He closed his eyes, his body caught between desire and denial. His hands brushed her skin, but only to push her away. Slowly, with cruel resolve.
"Did you not hear what I said?"
"I love the princess," he exclaimed, stepping back. Brighde felt fury eclipse her pain. She glared at him, her face flushed.
Is that really what you want? For us to be strangers? Yes, that's what I want, he said flatly, turning to pour himself another drink. And now enough.
I'm tired. Go to bed.
I'm tired too, she growled. Tired of you.
Go to hell, Eoghan MacKerran. If I had known, I'd have married Connell.
At least with him, I'd know what to expect. The silence that followed was brutal.
Brighde shot him one last look, full of rage and resentment, before returning to her room. She slammed the door shut and collapsed onto the bed, where she finally allowed herself to cry. Eoghan had broken her heart.
And the worst part was that despite everything, she still loved him.
Love rarely arrived in its purest form from the start.
It hid behind duty, desire, fear.
For Eoghan, Brighde had first been a responsibility, then a flame he couldn't extinguish, and finally, a dilemma between what he believed was right and what he couldn't help but feel. For so long his life had been defined by loyalty to his clan, by respect for Alistair's court, by the weight of decisions that always seemed bigger than himself. He couldn't so easily defy the will of the monarch, nor betray his own sense of honor.
But when he saw her in another man's arms, when he realized that time was running out, a single truth pushed through all his doubts: he couldn't lose her. Maybe he wasn't ready.
Maybe he still didn't fully understand what it meant to love her. But he did know that watching her marry someone else would leave a wound that would never heal. His decision wasn't an impulsive act, but the recognition that love didn't always wait for us to be prepared. Sometimes it forced itself upon us, a destiny we had to embrace or let go forever. Marrying Brighde wasn't the easiest choice.
It was the most honest one.
And even though fear and uncertainty accompanied him, he chose to take that step. Because something was stronger than his doubt, louder than his pride, the desire to share his life with her, even if the path ahead was still unclear. Eoghan felt his heart rip open as Brighde's sobs broke through the thick walls of the room. His instinct screamed at him to go to her, to hold her in his arms and soothe her, to whisper comfort until her pain eased.
But he couldn't. He mustn't.
He had made a decision, and he had to stand by it, even if every tear she shed was like a dagger in his soul.
The truth weighed on his chest like a stone, a truth he would have to confess eventually.
He couldn't condemn her to ignorance, not when her future hung in the balance. Yet he hadn't found the courage, at least not before being sure he could annul the marriage. And maybe, deep down, he held on to the foolish hope that some unexpected solution would arise, one that wouldn't require them to break each other's hearts. Brighde's sobs grew louder, more painful. Eoghan closed his eyes and leaned his head against the wall, resisting the urge to go to her. He had been cruel, deliberately cruel, hoping to drive her away. He told himself it was for her own good, over and over, but it did nothing to ease the pain eating him alive. Could he have chosen differently? Would it have been better never to ask for her hand?
But there was no going back now.
He had to face the consequences, and find a way to repair the damage. He let out a heavy sigh and poured himself a glass of whiskey, sinking onto the bench where he planned to spend the night.
The drink burned down his throat, but it did nothing to calm the storm raging inside him.
His thoughts were a whirlwind of doubt and regret, all circling back to Brighde. The image of her in her nightdress, little more than a veil over the delicate curves of her body, assaulted him mercilessly. Her skin against his, the warmth of her embrace, the sweetness of her scent. Brighde, as radiant as a sunny day, so breathtaking that desire hit him with a fierceness that left him breathless.
He wanted her.
More than ever. With an intensity that frightened him. No other woman had ever haunted his thoughts like this, and no matter how hard he tried to understand it, the answer eluded him. He had kissed her once, foolishly thinking that would be enough to rid her from his soul, but all it did was bind him to her even more. He knew that if he allowed himself to walk through that door and make her his again, they would be doomed.
He had to resist.
He couldn't drag her down into the misery that awaited them. He had saved her life only to push them both toward a hell from which there would be no escape. And yet, in that moment, he would have given anything to be beside her. To hold her, to lose himself in her, to beg her forgiveness with every touch, every kiss, to give her all the pleasure his body and soul could offer. Eoghan closed his eyes with a trembling sigh. His body ached for her, but his heart knew the sacrifice was necessary.
There would be no redemption for them.
Only the certainty that one day their paths would diverge forever, taking with them the remnants of an impossible love. Eoghan rested his elbows on his knees and buried his face in his hands, feeling the weight of a threat he couldn't ignore. If Tavish MacDara ever found out about his marriage to Brighde, the outcome would be devastating. He wasn't just a man jealous of his influence, he was a ruthless strategist who wouldn't hesitate to use any excuse to unleash a storm of blood and vengeance. The very fact that he had discovered Eoghan's initial engagement to the princess proved that he had eyes and ears at court, and if he had interfered once, what would stop him from doing it again? The risk wasn't just to him, but to Brighde, to her clan, to anyone who could be caught in the spiral of retaliation. MacDara wouldn't settle for threats alone, he would demand a price that Eoghan wasn't willing to pay. If their marriage came to light, that man's fury would go beyond mere words.
That's why he had to remain resolute, distance himself from Brighde, and find a way to fix his mistake before it was too late. Chapter 15. A man may lose everything except his honor, and his love if he is foolish enough.
The garden was wrapped in a gentle breeze that carried the scent of night-blooming flowers. Brighde sat on a stone bench, her gaze lost in the shadows. She barely noticed Orla's arrival, until her friend dropped beside her with a sigh.
"You seem sad, dear friend."
"What's wrong?" she asked softly, studying Bride's face pale under the moonlight.
"You look like anything but a happy woman on her wedding night."
Brighde hesitated before replying. She didn't know if she should confess what weighed on her heart. She felt that if she spoke it aloud, it would give shape to her misfortune, make her disappointment even more real.
But Orla's comfort was too tempting.
With a shaky sigh, she lowered her gaze.
"I'm living a true hell, Orla," she murmured in a broken tone. I didn't become Eoghan's wife tonight."
Orla blinked in surprise but said nothing right away. Instead, she slid her hand over Bride's and gave it a warm squeeze.
Her friend was on the verge of tears, fighting with all her strength to remain composed. "Oh, Brighde. Tell me everything, if it helps you feel better."
Brighde looked at her with anguish.
She could hardly meet her gaze. "He didn't want me, he slept on the couch," she finally confessed, the sadness choking her.
The words knotted in her throat.
"He gave me a reason, but it doesn't satisfy me. There's something else, I'm sure of it. Something he's not telling me."
The compassion in Orla's eyes was a momentary balm for her wounded heart. Brighde had feared their relationship might be distant, even hostile, but in that moment she realized Orla had a noble soul, untouched by the malice that reigned at court. "Before our marriage," Brighde continued, almost in a whisper, as if speaking to herself, "he desired me.
I saw it in his eyes.
He couldn't be near me without wanting to kiss me, and he suffered for not being able to because he was engaged to the princess. Despite appearances, Eoghan is a man of principles, though right now I wish he weren't quite so noble." Orla tilted her head, watching her with a hint of surprise.
"Would you have let him dishonor you?" she asked gently, though clearly perplexed.
Brighde let out a bitter laugh and shook her head.
"Yes, Orla. I think I would have done anything for him," she admitted in a whisper, her chest tightening. "But that wasn't the point now."
She straightened, trying to draw strength from her posture.
"The point is that now he avoids me."
"He must be the only man in this court who respects women." Orla chuckled.
"True."
To the dismay of some. Brighde raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to go on. Orla brought her fingers to her mouth, as if regretting her words.
"Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to say that." "It's all right," Brighde replied with a sigh. "I know he stirs passions in many women, and I'm no exception. But our situation is more complicated than it seems.
Eoghan married me to stop my wedding to Connell. In doing so he gave up his freedom, and when my uncle finds out, I don't know what will happen.
It could mean war between our clans. The thought sent a shiver through her.
She couldn't bear to be the cause of conflict. She couldn't live with the guilt of seeing her brothers fight, even die because of her. Ola seemed to sense her anguish and squeezed her hand tighter. In any case, I'm glad Conall is gone.
I won't miss him.
Brighde nodded, remembering bitterly how Conall had mistreated her, how he had forced his touch upon her. If it hadn't been for Eoghan.
I know what you should do.
Ola suddenly exclaimed, her eyes lighting up with excitement. Brighde raised an eyebrow.
What are you suggesting? Make him jealous.
The excitement in Ola's voice drew an involuntary smile from her. The idea didn't seem so far-fetched.
He already saved you once, her friend went on enthusiastically, and I'm sure he loves you.
So tonight you'll dance with other men and ignore him.
You'll see how he reacts. What do you say?
Brighde considered it for a moment and after a pause gave a mischievous smile.
Would you have a dress I could borrow?
Ola burst into laughter and hugged her warmly.
You'll win your husband's heart, Brighde. I'm certain of it.
Brighde wished for it with all her heart.
Chapter 16.
Eoghan felt the urge to run after Brighde, to hold her in his arms and confess how deeply the situation was consuming him.
But for what?
What good would it do to reveal his feelings, when fate had already denied them a future together? The sooner their marriage was annulled, the sooner they could escape the wasp's nest they were trapped in. He should have found another solution with the king before asking for her hand, should have told him about Conall, should have let her marry whomever she wished, because he had no right. Unless, he simply hadn't been able to accept the idea of seeing her with another man.
He cursed himself in silence.
Look where your foolishness and selfishness have brought you, why couldn't he think before acting?
That woman drove him mad like no other ever had. Perhaps it was because, despite being married, he couldn't have her without risking a war.
He returned to the palace determined to drown his torment in wine, dreaming of running away with Brighde instead of going home.
But how would they survive?
She had grown up in comfort, he couldn't condemn her to misery. He couldn't abandon his family just like that. His clan would never understand or forgive him. And yet, maybe exile in France could be a solution. He could fight under the banner of Charles the Victorious, serve his cause and at worst die in battle.
But what would become of Brighde if that happened?
Would she even want to follow him? No, she hated him, and rightly so. He had humiliated her when all he truly wanted was to love and protect her. As he passed the kitchen, he asked for a jug of wine and made his way to his chambers with heavy steps. He would drink until sleep took him in solitude, while she lay alone in her bed. Each step toward his rooms was a battle against the urge to find her, to lose himself in her and find some peace. When he arrived, he found the door locked from the inside.
His heart quickened.
Conall, was she in danger? He knocked urgently.
Brighde.
Open up. The silence chilled his blood until, after a few seconds, he heard her voice from the other side.
Who is it?
He rolled his eyes toward the ceiling, exasperated.
It's me, Brighde. And who is me?
Eoghan MacKerran.
Your husband. You must be mistaken, my lord. I have no husband, or at least none worthy of the title.
Eoghan felt heat rush through his veins.
He took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Brighde, he growled, open this door right now. Or what, my dear MacKerran? What will you do to me?
Her tone, defiant, sensual, lit a fire in his body.
Trust me, you don't want to find out. That, darling, is for me to decide. Then open up and let's talk face to face. I don't think so, my lord. At least not until you've calmed down. Brighde, his voice turned into a threat. Patience is not my strength. Much like loyalty to your wife, apparently.
You treat her with such negligence. Eoghan pinched the bridge of his nose. Why could she drive him insane with so few words?
Can't we just talk about this, without a door between us? Why should I open it, when you never talk about us?
Go sleep with your guards.
I'm sure they'll be just as useful as I am. Her words lit something inside him.
Since when did her defiance excite him like this? Open this door, Brighde, or I'll break it down. And suddenly, before he could react, she was standing before him. Wearing nothing but her nightdress, revealing the pale glow of her skin, the line of her collarbones, the curve of her hips.
His breath caught.
He placed the wine jug on the floor and stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. Brighde stepped back, not in fear but with a fire in her eyes. She raised her chin, ready to face him. Her flame-red hair tumbled over her shoulders, her skin gleaming in the firelight. She was so close, and the air between them crackled with tension.
What were you going to say earlier, before we were interrupted? What was it you wanted to tell me? She asked, her voice low and husky.
She blinked, surprised.
I was going to say I only want to love you, Eoghan, she whispered. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. You love me, he repeated, barely audible. Yes, Eoghan, I love you.
From the very first moment.
And I think I always will.
Brighde was fire, and in that moment, Eoghan only wanted to burn in her. The silence of the night enveloped them, broken only by the whisper of wind slipping through the cracks in the stone and the soft crackling of the fire in the hearth. In the dim light their eyes met, heavy with all they had left unsaid for so long. Brighde felt the brush of Eoghan's fingers along her cheek, infinitely tender, as if he were memorizing every line of her face. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself be carried by the warmth of his touch, by the intensity in his gaze, as though she were the only thing in his world.
You're incredible, he murmured, his voice a breath against her skin.
Goosebumps danced across Brighde's skin as his lips moved softly across her forehead, her temple, then slowly down to the corner of her mouth, lingering there, playing with the tension between them. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, seeking to lose herself in his warmth, in the safety of his embrace. They moved with the gentleness of two souls who belonged to one another, unhurried, as if time held no sway over them. Between quiet laughter and touches, full of longing, they gave themselves over to the moment, letting passion and tenderness weave them together like invisible threads. Brighde remained in Eoghan's arms, feeling his calm breath against her neck. Without opening her eyes, she clung to the warmth of his body, to the steady beat of his heart. In that moment, she knew that whatever fate had in store for them that night, that sense of fullness and love, would stay with her forever. Still, a dark feeling crept over her. Eoghan turned, expecting to see Brighde content, but all he saw on her face was concern. He frowned, stepping closer, trying to read in her expression what her lips had yet to say.
Why? He asked, raising a brow in confusion.
Brighde held his gaze and answered with a calmness that did little to mask the unease in her voice.
I know how a child is conceived, Eoghan. She definitely knew many things.
She was far from naive, far from the fragility her upbringing might have suggested. She wasn't shy or modest, she had given herself to him with a boldness that had disarmed him, had melted into his passion without hesitation. And he had savored every moment, every stifled moan against his lips, every shiver his touch had drawn from her.
But that didn't erase the guilt.
He had spilled his seed on the sheets.
He shouldn't have given in. He had no right. The sisters-in-law, he guessed.
She nodded with a faint smile, but then her eyes locked on his, carrying a question heavier than the air between them.
You don't want any?
Eoghan's chest tightened. He stood without replying, and began to dress under Brighde's watchful gaze.
He knew he was about to hurt her.
Again.
But it had to be done. Eoghan, she murmured, sitting up and pulling the sheet around her.
Her voice held the faintest tremor, but he felt it echo in his own conscience. Once more he saw her fragile, vulnerable. And he, who had always seen her as strong, defiant, proud, hated himself for forcing her into that moment. For humiliating her.
But it was necessary. Yes, of course, he said at last, not looking at her, his tone colder than he truly felt, but not now. She didn't accept it.
Reaching out, she grasped his arm firmly before he could walk away.
Why? She pressed.
Her voice was a plea masked as determination. Eoghan felt a sharp pain in his chest as he saw those anguished eyes fixed on him.
But he couldn't give in. You know very well why, Brighde, he snapped, his tone harsher than he'd intended.
Rage mixed with despair.
He should never have touched her.
Should never have let desire win. It had been a mistake, his mistake, and now she would pay the price too.
Don't tell me you still want to annul the marriage, Eoghan, she whispered, her sadness hitting him like a blow. We have no choice, Brighde.
She blinked, as if his words had struck her with violence.
The pain on her face was a dagger. We always have a choice, Eoghan, she replied with a calm he no longer had. We'll find a solution.
Together.
There is no solution, he burst out, shaking off her hand.
Desperation laced his voice, despite his effort to suppress it.
Are you really that blind?
Brighde sat up abruptly, her gaze sharpening with outrage.
I'm perfectly aware.
I knew you were a lecher, Eoghan MacKerran, but I didn't think you were a coward.
It was truly foolish of me to believe you were a good man.
Her voice turned to ice.
Better this way. If she hates me, it'll be easier to leave. But then she shattered him with a single sentence.
Did what we just shared mean nothing to you? Her voice broke and her eyes glistening with unshed tears nearly broke Eoghan's resolve. The pain in his chest became a wound that burned like a curse he could never undo. He took a deep breath, and summoned the last bit of willpower to say the words that would damn him.
It was a mistake, he said, each syllable falling like a stone. It won't happen again.
She trembled but didn't look away.
I told you I loved you.
She was brave. Braver than he would ever be. And he was a coward.
I'm sorry. That doesn't change anything.
The last thing he saw before leaving was her stricken face, a face that would haunt him forever. He closed the door quietly behind him and staggered through the hall, his soul in tatters. He reached for a glass, but his hands trembled too much to hold it. With a muffled cry of rage, he hurled it into the fire.
If only things had been different. But his fate was sealed.
And his soul, now held captive by Brighde, would drag him straight to hell. As soon as Eoghan closed the door behind him, Brighde collapsed onto the bed, overwhelmed by a silent cry that soon gave way to ragged sobs. Every tear that slid down her cheeks carried pain, frustration, and love. She couldn't understand how he could love her so deeply, only to push her away as if nothing had ever happened.
The happiness she'd felt in his arms had been real.
For a fleeting moment, she'd allowed herself to dream of a future together, of a love without chains or fear, of a home built on the passion that consumed them.
But he had rejected her.
Chosen duty over his heart. She rolled onto her back, staring blankly at the ceiling, her chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. She couldn't stop loving him, even if she tried.
It didn't matter how much he hurt her, how far he pushed her away, her heart already belonged to him. And he was her husband. Not just by law but through the bond they had forged that night.
She knew Eoghan was fighting something bigger than the two of them. His struggle wasn't with her but with himself. Yet in his cowardice, he was pulling her down into the same pit of despair. Why couldn't he just accept it? Why couldn't he admit that what had happened between them wasn't a mistake, but a truth that bound them irrevocably?
She took a deep breath and closed her eyes.
She wouldn't let him push her away so easily. She'd seen the fire in his eyes, the same fire that burned in hers. She had felt his need, his desire, his love, even if he refused to name it. And if she had to make him see they belonged to each other, she would. Not with words but with the one truth Eoghan couldn't deny, his own desire.
They had consummated the marriage.
Highland law allowed him to repudiate her if there was no child, but she wouldn't give up so easily. She knew that if she could make him succumb one more time, everything would repeat itself. She would slip back into his thoughts, his nights, his desires, until he understood he couldn't stay away. until he accepted that he loved her as fiercely as she loved him. She wasn't a frightened girl. She was Brighde MacDara, and she would fight for her husband and for their love with every ounce of determination in her spirit.